I've seen centuries pass me by. I watched as the forest grew dense around me, its roots weaving into the earth, hiding me away like a secret long forgotten. Once, I was the pride of a wealthy household, a vessel of joy and prosperity. Now, I am just a relic, buried, waiting. Sometimes I wonder, will anyone ever find me? Will someone see the value I still hold, beyond the rust and dirt? Or will I remain here forever, a silent witness to the passage of time? One day she appeared. Her clothes were simple and worn, her face lined with years of hard work. Each step she took seemed careful yet heavy, as though life itself had placed burdens upon her shoulders. Her eyes wandered across the forest floor, not searching for anything in particular, yet carrying a quiet hope for something to change. She stopped suddenly, her gaze locking onto me. Slowly she knelt, brushing away the dirt and leaves that had blanketed me for years. Her hands, rough from decades of labor, uncovered the dull metal of my surface. But inside, something sparkled, something that made her pause, eyes wide with wonder and disbelief. And so, my story began again. But this time, it wasn't just about what I carried inside, it was about what I could teach. Little did she know, the real treasure wasn't gold or jewels, it was something far greater, something she would only discover through the journey ahead. Centuries ago, in a bustling village surrounded by lush green fields, I came into existence. I wasn't just a simple cooking pot. I was crafted by the hands of a master blacksmith. He was a man of extraordinary skill and boundless love for his family. Every curve of my body, every etching on my surface, was the result of his dedication and care. The blacksmith wasn't wealthy, but he believed in the power of intention. He poured his hopes and dreams into me as he worked, whispering to himself, "This pot will bring my family prosperity and joy. It will hold more than just food. It will hold the essence of our togetherness." When I was finally complete, I shone with a brilliance that reflected his pride. For years, I sat at the heart of his home. I wasn't just a tool, I was a symbol. I held warm stews that nourished his family during long winters. I carried water on scorching summer days. I was there when they laughed, cried, and shared stories by the firelight. As time passed, the blacksmith's children grew, and their children after them. I became a treasure, passed down through generations. At one point, I even became a vessel for the family's small fortune. Gold coins and jewelry carefully tucked away within me, hidden from prying eyes. But wealth is a fickle thing. As the family prospered, so too did greed and jealousy. Arguments erupted over who should inherit me. Brothers turned against brothers, sisters whispered behind closed doors, and the once loving family began to fracture. One fateful night, the family's youngest son, driven by anger and envy, decided to take me for himself. In his haste to flee, he dropped me in the depths of a dense forest. There, amidst the roots and fallen leaves, I lay forgotten. Years turned into decades, and decades into centuries. My once polished surface grew dull, tarnished by the elements. The gold I had once safeguarded had long since been scattered, either by nature or by time. I watched the world change around me. Trees that were once saplings grew tall, their branches forming a canopy that hid me from view. Seasons came and went, and the sounds of human voices became a distant memory. In my solitude, I often thought back to the family I once belonged to the warmth of their home, and the dreams that had been poured into me. I wondered if I had failed them, or if they had failed themselves. Am I still of any value? I often ask myself. Or am I just a relic of a forgotten past? As the years wore on, I stopped hoping. I told myself that no one would ever find me again, and even if they did, they would only see an old, rusty pot, not the symbol of hope and unity I once was. She was tired. I could see it in the way she walked, each step heavy with the weight of her burdens. Her clothes were simple, worn thin from years of toil, and her face, lined and weary, spoke of a life filled with struggle. She moved through the forest slowly, her gaze fixed downward, her hands reaching for twigs and branches. She wasn't searching for me, not yet, but I felt something in her, a quiet longing, a small, fragile hope for something more. Then she saw me. At first her expression didn't change. To her, I must have seemed like nothing more than another discarded relic, half buried in the dirt. But as her hands brushed away the leaves and roots that covered me, I saw her pause. She leaned closer, her breath catching as her eyes widened. Inside me, gold gleamed. Her hands trembled as she reached in, her fingers brushing against one of the coins. Slowly she lifted it into the light, turning it over in her hands. I could feel her heart racing, her mind filling with possibilities. "It's real," she whispered. I had seen this before, the disbelief, the wonder, the spark of something new. Her thoughts raced, her dreams unfolding before my silent gaze. A new home, a warm fire, a life without hunger or fear. She tied these hopes to me, binding them as tightly as the ropes she used to fashion a sled. I felt the shift in her, from despair to determination. She wouldn't leave me behind. I was her key to a better life, and she would drag me, no matter how heavy I was, or how uneven the ground beneath her feet became. As she tugged at the sled, her muscles straining, I watched her. She had the same look I had seen in so many others before her, those who thought the treasure inside me could solve everything. But the truth was, the treasure was already beginning to change. I felt it first, a subtle shift within me, a dulling of the coin's luster. She didn't notice. Not yet. Her focus was fixed on the road ahead, her energy fueled by hope. I had seen this hope before, and I knew what often followed. But I remained silent, as I always did, waiting for her to see for herself. She pulled with all her strength, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. For the first time in years, she moved with purpose. She believed she was saving herself, one step at a time. I wondered, as I always did, why they never looked beyond what I carried inside, why they couldn't see that I was more than the sum of my contents. But humans rarely do. For now, I let her pull. Her dreams drove her forward, and I knew the journey was far from over. The sled groaned as it scraped against the forest floor. I could feel her struggle, each step an act of sheer determination. Her hands trembled against the ropes, her breath labored. Yet, she pressed on, her heart too full of dreams to notice the pain in her back, or the rawness of her palms. The golden coins within me jingled softly with every pull, a melody of promise that seemed to drive her forward. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows through the trees, she paused to catch her breath. She leaned against a tree, her gaze falling on me. There was a faint smile on her face, a look of quiet triumph. "This is it," her eyes seemed to say. "This is the answer I've been waiting for." But then I saw it, the flicker of confusion as she knelt to adjust the sled. Her hand reached inside me, pulling out one of the coins. She rubbed it with her thumb, her movements growing frantic as the coin failed to shine the way it had before. Her breath quickened. Why is this happening? I could almost hear the question in her mind. But she shook her head, whispering to herself, "It's still gold. Even if it's not as shiny, it's still gold. It'll still change everything." She pulled the sled again, her pace slower now. The forest darkened, the trees standing taller, heavier, as if they were silently watching her struggle. I felt her doubt creeping in, but she pushed it aside, gripping the ropes tighter. Time passed, and the air grew colder. She stopped again, exhaustion radiating through her body. As she reached into me, her hand froze. The gold was gone. I felt the weight of her silence as she stared at what I now carried. Silver coins, dull and lifeless compared to the golden dreams she had clung to. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "No, this can't be. Where did the gold go?" I had no answers for her. I never did. But I had seen this before. The way hope would twist into panic, how dreams would tighten their grip just before slipping away. She dropped to her knees, tears threatening to spill as she sifted through the silver. Her hands searched frantically, as if willing the gold to return. But it was gone, and only the cold, hard silver remained. Her breath hitched, and for a moment I thought she might leave me there. But she didn't. Clutching a handful of silver coins, she whispered, "It's still valuable. Silver is still better than nothing. It's enough to start over." I watched as she stood, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her resolve unbroken. She tied the ropes tighter, muttering reassurances to herself, as she dragged me forward once again. But the spark that had lit her eyes earlier had dimmed, replaced by a gnawing uncertainty. I knew she wouldn't stop. Not yet. The weight of her dreams wouldn't let her. But I knew what was coming. As the hours stretched on, I felt the silver begin to change. Its luster faded, tarnishing under the weight of time. By the time we neared the edge of the forest, it had turned to iron, jagged, rusted, and cold. She didn't notice at first, her focus fixed on reaching home. But then the sled tipped, spilling some of my contents onto the ground. I felt her pause. She bent down, her hands trembling as she picked up a piece of iron. Turning it over in her palm, her shoulders sagged under the weight of realization. There was no silver left, no gold, only iron. Her voice was soft, broken. "Why?" she asked the air, as though expecting an answer. "Why did this happen? What did I do wrong?" I watched her sink to the ground beside me, her tears falling freely now. This moment was familiar to me, hope dissolving into despair, dreams reduced to dust. I didn't judge her. I never judged. But I couldn't help wondering, why do they only see what I hold inside? Why do they never see me for what I truly am? She sat there for what felt like an eternity, torn between the weight of her disappointment and the stubborn flicker of hope that refused to die. I could feel her battle, her longing to leave me behind, warring with the voice that whispered, "Just a little farther. Maybe there's still something left." Finally she stood, gripping the ropes once more. Her body screamed in protest, every muscle straining as she pulled me forward. But she didn't stop. Driven by a mixture of desperation and resolve, she pressed on, each step heavier than the last. I stayed silent, as I always had, watching her. I carried no answers, only the memories of those who had carried me before. The journey was not yet over. She stopped at the edge of a stream, the soft murmur of water breaking the stillness around us. The ropes fell from her hands as she sank to the ground, her body trembling with exhaustion. I could feel her despair, like a weight pressing against me, heavier than the gold, the silver, or even the iron I once held. She stared at the flowing water, her eyes unfocused, lost in thought. For the first time since she had found me, she didn't reach inside. She didn't check for treasures. She didn't hope for something new. She simply sat there, motionless, as if the forest itself had stolen her will to move. I observed her, silently as always, but in that silence I could sense the battle within her, the push and pull of dreams and reality, of what she had hoped for and what she had found. Her gaze shifted to the stream, and a memory seemed to flicker across her face. Her shoulders relaxed, and her breathing slowed as she leaned back against a tree. I couldn't see the memory, but I could feel its warmth in the way she softened. "I used to come here," she whispered, though not to me, "before the farm got so hard to manage, before everything became survival." Her voice was distant, as though she were speaking to the stream or to the shadows of her past. "I remember sitting by the water, letting the cool breeze wash over me," she said. "There wasn't much to worry about then. The harvests were better, the nights were quieter. I didn't have much, but I didn't feel empty." She reached for a smooth stone near her feet, turning it over in her hands. "Back then, I didn't dream of riches or grand houses. I dreamed of laughter, of evenings spent with friends, sharing bread and stories by the fire." Her voice faltered, and she sighed. "When did I stop being happy with that? When did it become not enough?" I wanted to tell her what I had seen in the years I spent in silence, the families who fought over me, the lives consumed by the promise of wealth. But I had no voice. Only my presence, my weight, my unchanging existence. She looked at me then, her eyes scanning my worn surface. "You were supposed to be the answer," she murmured, her voice soft and tired. "You were supposed to fix everything." I felt a pang at her words. I had never promised her anything. I had simply been there, waiting, as I always had. Her hands rested on the ropes, but she didn't pull. Instead, she stared at the stream again, the sound of water filling the silence between us. Slowly her grip loosened, and she let the ropes fall. For a long moment, she sat there motionless. Then, as if a decision had taken root within her, she stood. She didn't reach for the sled or for me. She didn't even glance back. She simply stood, her eyes fixed on the path that led home. "I don't need this," she said aloud, her voice steady now. "I don't need gold, or silver, or anything else you carry. I've already wasted too much time chasing something that doesn't matter." She stepped away, her movements slow but purposeful. I felt the release as she left me there by the stream, the ropes abandoned, the weight of her dreams finally lifted. As she disappeared into the trees, I remained where I had always been, silent and still. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel forgotten. I had been found. Not for what I carried, but for what I had helped her discover. Perhaps, I thought, that's enough. Perhaps my purpose isn't to hold treasures, but to help others see what they have had all along. And so, I stayed by the stream, watching the water flow, the sunlight dancing on its surface. The woman was gone, but I knew she would be fine. She had left me behind, but she had taken something far more valuable with her. The woman returned home as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Her steps were slower, but not from exhaustion. They were deliberate, steady, as though she had finally found her footing after years of being lost. Her small house came into view, its weathered walls glowing softly in the fading light. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and the scent of baked bread from a neighbor's kitchen wafted through the air. She paused for a moment, taking it all in. The sights, the sounds, the life she had built. Imperfect, yes, but hers. Inside, the woman set a kettle on the stove and sank into her chair by the fire. It wasn't new or luxurious, but it was comfortable, familiar. She ran her hands over the worn wood of the armrests, a faint smile playing on her lips. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the gnawing ache of longing. She didn't think about what was missing. She thought only of what she had. The quiet hum of the village outside her window reminded her that she was not alone. There were neighbors who would share a warm loaf of bread or a kind word, even when they had little to spare. There were children who laughed as they played in the dirt paths, their joy unshaken by life's hardships. And there was the stream, a place she could always return to when she needed to remember what truly mattered. Far away, I lay by that same stream, nestled among the roots and leaves. The ropes she had used to drag me lay discarded, the imprint of her journey still etched into the soil. But I didn't feel abandoned. I felt content. I had watched her leave, her burdens lighter, her heart fuller. She had come to me seeking treasure, but she had left with something far greater. The realization that happiness was never something to be found. It was something to be felt, something to be nurtured in the quiet moments of a simple life. As the stream whispered its song and the stars began to appear above, I thought of all the others who had carried me before her. Some had learned, as she did. Others had not. But for her, the lesson was clear. Happiness, I thought, doesn't come from what we own, but from how we live in love. And with that thought, I settled into the earth once more, not with sadness, but with peace. My purpose had been fulfilled, if only for one person, and perhaps that was enough. As we reflect on this story, let's take a moment to think about its message. The woman in the story believed she needed something extraordinary to change her life. But in the end, she discovered that happiness was never in the gold, silver, or even the iron. It was in the simple moments she had overlooked. Happiness isn't about chasing after what we don't have. It's about appreciating what we do. It's found in the warmth of a home, the kindness of neighbors, and the beauty of everyday life. It's in the laughter we share, the love we give, and the peace we find within ourselves. What about you? What brings you happiness? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your reflections in the comments below. What lesson did you take from this story? If this message resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Remember, no matter where you are or what you have, happiness is always within reach. It's not in what you own, but in how you live and love. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep finding joy in the little things.